This is the start of a series where I review every One Piece arc. When a lot of people think One Piece, honestly, the first arc isn't what might come to mind. I very rarely hear anybody talking about Romance Dawn other than Shanks, and I can't exactly blame you for this if you do this, because nowadays, One Piece is known to be a grand, colourful display of insane powers in an insane world, and lately, there have been so many impressive displays of huge-scale, world-altering powers that it's hard to believe that it all came from this. So naturally, you don't really hear that much about the first arc of One Piece. Romance Dawn is very modest compared to nearly every other later arc, especially in the anime. Our very first episode in the anime is about Alvida. In hindsight, that's pretty fucking wild. The first episode only really introduces a couple things: Gold Roger, the One Piece, and Luffy. Everything else in this episode is really negligible. Alvida is like the ultimate Chapter 2 character, and while Koby is good, he's annoying and he doesn't really appear for 400 chapters after that. However, the manga version of Romance Dawn has a very key difference to the anime: the inclusion of backstories. We get both Luffy's backstory and Zoro's backstory, which honestly gives the manga a huge edge over the anime in terms of quality. Because of this, you could argue that Romance Dawn isn't quite as modest. In fact, it is a pretty typical example of a big event that changes the main character's life, giving them their powers and setting up the story. While this type of thing is relevant throughout all of fiction, there is an argument to be made that this is one of the most influential chapter 1s in manga. I feel like nearly every modern shonen follows a very similar structure. Chainsaw Man, My Hero, Black Clover, Jujutsu Kaisen. The first chapters / episodes of each of these shows are pretty similar, and while I'm not going to contribute this entirely to One Piece, it is no secret that it is a very influential show. And to be honest, with the quality of Luffy's backstory, it's really no surprise it's so influential. It is one of the greatest moments in all of One Piece. Luffy giving Shanks his hat back will probably be a greater moment than Gear 5. The rest of Romance Dawn, however, is less influential. I wouldn't even say it's the best arc in East Blue. Or second best. It is probably the most iconic simply because of the great backstories. Shanks is in this. It's not really that fair. Although it's not a real issue as the anime goes over backstories only a few episodes later, if we look at Romance Dawn isolated, the manga is better by a pretty decent margin. The actual conflict in Romance Dawn is the weakest part, and while I'm not complaining because it is only chapter 6, these are pretty weak villains even by One Piece standard. Both Alvida and Captain Axhanjak, or whatever his name is, are pretty fucking lame. But hey, this arc is far more concerned with Luffy and Zoro's characters. They are both characterized so quickly, it took several Straw Hats their own arc to believe that Luffy would be king of the pirates. I would have done that shit day one. Zoro's past, on the other hand, while not as influential or popular in general, is actually one of my favourites in the whole show. Half a chapter, and the impact that it leaves is just very impressive. Having gender play such an important role in the character of a serious, edgy shonen character is incredible, and although we don't see it as often, it does massively affect Zoro. My last note is Koby. Yeah, he's actually pretty good. Although I call him annoying a lot, Oda very quickly shows the importance of dreams in this show by having Koby begin to fulfill his dream with Luffy's help. As far back as episode 1, Luffy is shown to be supporting people's dreams, which kind of becomes his thing. While by no means is Romance Dawn a masterpiece of an arc, it is a very iconic, effective start to a story as big as One Piece. I think that one of the greatest parts of this show is thinking, wow, despite everything, we made it from there to here. That in itself is very impressive. I think it's quite common for authors to kind of stumble their way for the first part of their manga, and I imagine it's quite hard to figure out what direction you would want your manga going in. And to be honest, making conflicts seem important at the start of the show can be difficult, and that can lead to some weird or out-of-place moments in fights. Although Aksan Morgan and Alvida are a little weak, we can at least see that Oda knew what he was doing. Aksan Morgan is a precursor to all the corrupt marines, and Alvida is a pretty typical example of a pirate being a dickhead. So, it's nice to see that Oda doesn't really do anything that out of place here. He does that later.